Well, an absolute bombshell of a story that really changes, I think, American history. It turns out that there was one group running most of the funding and facilitation of these bombings and riots and chaos in the United States over the last few decades, specifically the chaos and riots and bombings that are always blamed on white supremacists. That is the Southern Poverty Law Center, the SPLC. And when you see a Charlottesville white supremacist riot or fires in Florida or Oklahoma City bombing, well, it turns out their feds were involved or part of this nonprofit funding of individuals who show up at these events. They were being funded and fueled by the SPLC, according to the Trump DOJ. The Trump administration, under their acting attorney general, Todd Blanche, indicted the SPLC for running all the white supremacist groups in the United States, essentially. And they didn't hold back in this press conference at all. Take a listen.
Good afternoon. Today, a few minutes ago, in the Middle District of Alabama, a grand jury returned an 11-count indictment charging the Southern Poverty Law Center with 6 counts of wire fraud, 4 counts of bank fraud, and 1 count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. According to the charges in the indictment, the SPLC is a nonprofit entity that purports to fight white supremacy and racial hatred by reporting on extremist groups and conducting research to inform law enforcement groups with the goal of dismantling these groups. As the indictment describes, the SPLC was not dismantling these groups. It was instead manufacturing the extremism it purports to oppose by paying sources to stoke racial hatred. The indictment describes this conduct in detail, but one troubling example is that the SPLC was paying a member of the leadership group that planned the Unite the Right protest in Charlottesville, Virginia in 2017 that resulted in the death of 1 person and injured dozens more.
So manufacturing the extremism by paying sources to stoke racial hatred, responsible for the violence that we saw in Charlottesville and many more examples. Our next guest is Colonel Roxanne Towner-Watkins. She says the SPLC has funded both the left and the right as part of this so-called strategy of tension in order to create chaos. An example does this go back to the 1990s with Ruby Ridge, Waco, the Oklahoma City bombing, in order to create a narrative of white nationalist domestic terror in the United States, that this is the greatest threat to our sovereignty as white supremacists. The Biden administration told us that. They infiltrate them, they pay them, they blackmail them, and they have them carry out nefarious things. Colonel Roxanne Towner-Watkins joins us now to talk more about this. Colonel, thank you so much for joining. This is really an unbelievable story. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on. It's weird having done all of this research and watching this play out in real time. The strategy of tension, as we've talked about in the past, is basically the funding of both sides in order to scare the crap out of people and kind of psychological warfare methodology so that you can control the people. And they use different entities so that they appear, because if you go to the SPLC website, some of the most vicious left radical entities are being funded, but they don't list them on their hate map. And that's what's really interesting about this. I want to go back and talk just a few minutes about the 2 guys that set them up. It was created in 1971. The one that people talk about the most is Morris Seligman Dees Jr. And he was made to retire from there in 2019 because of all types of sexual and racial complaints about minorities that worked in the SPLC, of all things. And there's a man that had written a whole bunch of different articles about this like decades ago. And if you go back to Laird Wilcox is his name. If you try to find it on a normal search engine, you can't find any of his articles. You have to go to like Yandex or something like that to even find the articles. But he talked about Dee's being married 4 different times, and in the divorces, allegations of him having an affair, and his last wife made some salacious accusations. You have to take them with a grain of salt, obviously, but if you put them in context, you see the type of people that we're dealing with. He was accused of having multiple affairs with people that he was working with, being gay, and approaching her child from a former marriage. So just, again, take that with a grain of salt, but it's in context. I looked into the SPLC because they came up in when I was looking at domestic organizations under Operation Gladio that create strife in the United States. Their name was front and center. What I found most interesting about that research is they're almost always coupled with the ADL. They work on joint projects together because they make money off of hate. So the SPLC would represent primarily minorities in lawsuits and get these huge judgments against people that couldn't afford proper representation. Like one lady was had her son, who was African American, killed, and they were awarded like $5 or $6 million. But the 2 culprits, the accused in the murder, had $52,000, and this came from Wilcox reporting at the time it was happening, and the SPLC did fundraisers based off of that lawsuit and made millions of dollars and didn't give that woman a penny. And that's the kind of nefarious operation that they have. If you go back to his original job, he was a mass mail kind of guy. He got his original money to create the SPLC from selling it to the LA Times. And for anybody that followed my research, you know that the LA Times has worked hand in hand with the CIA doing domestic propaganda. So I just found that interesting tidbit. But the bottom line is their entire agenda is to weaponize hate.
Right. And that's exactly what the indictment lists, is that they are raising money from their donors, saying that they are going to combat racial inequality, but they are specifically sending that money through what they call the Fs, these people, F1, F2, which represent the KKK, neo-Nazi organizations, the Klan, Imperial Wizards.
Can we play this?
Can
we play this soundbite? Because he addresses this KKK point specifically. He's asked by a reporter, like, are you just kind of saying this? And he's like, no, it's in the indictment about the KKK. Listen.
I just want to make sure I understand. You're alleging that the Southern Poverty Law Center was paying the leaders of KKK and other groups to continue their operations? Is that?
I'm not alleging it. The grand jury returned an indictment that says that. And so what the investigation found, according to the indictment that was returned today, is that they were paying. So the Southern Poverty Law Center is raising money, asking folks to give them money to dismantle racism. And over a very long period of time, they were using some of the money they raised from donors to pay to, they called them field, basically to informants, for information, for access, to just pay them for certain to do certain things, and so.
Yeah.
So certain things. Can I just clarify what the indictment says that they were doing? They were giving one person. They gave him money to participate in cross burning. So what does that do? It riles up their donors. Oh, racism's out there. We better this is still a problem. It's a manufactured problem. What's another one? They asked a guy, they paid him a Klansman to take part in a Adopt a Highway program. So, of course, people are going to get so upset. Oh, no, the KKK is adopting a highway. They want this on our roads. This is still a problem. That's manufactured terrorism.
So the key thing that he said was they were paying leaders. So when you infiltrate an organization, you don't normally infiltrate it at the leadership level. And that basically takes this to an entire new height, because the leader is the one that is conducting the operations. They weren't infiltrating at the rank level and extracting intelligence on how the organization worked. They were literally putting leaders of these organizations that are conducting these operations domestically on their payroll.
So when I look at their website, Colonel, here I am on their website, and you can go to their hate section of their website, where they list all of the extremist groups and ideologies and all of the, yes. And you can search it if you want to. You can go down, you can see Stu Peters, you can see all these other people in here. And so a lot of these, not Stu, but a lot of these groups that they're purporting are out there being hateful, they're funding.
Correct. And to your point, I want to make this clear. They're select ones that promote their agenda that they were paying. They put people on there like Moms for Liberty. They put Charlie Kirk's TP USA on there. So they are smearing. So if you were just to go down randomly and say say they have 100 and 1 out of 10 are on that list, that they're actually paying, it then allows them the ability to mesh all of the legitimate ones onto that list while they're controlling a percentage of them to continue this narrative of hate.
Did you know that most methylene blue being sold online is the same grade used in fish tanks? Watch out for low-quality bottles that are untested for heavy metals and they're made overseas. Well, you can trust the wellness company's Recharge, which is a doctor-formulated supplement that combines powdered methylene blue with NAD+ and PQQ. Now, this methylene blue is USP grade, ensuring top-tier purity for maximum safety and effectiveness. This is not some sketchy stuff that you're going to find on Amazon. Recharge is formulated with research-backed ingredients to optimize brain function and cellular repair while supporting clean, lasting energy. So tap into cognitive and metabolic support that helps you stay energized, focused, and resilient all day long. Choose a trusted formula made for you, not for fish tanks. You can feel the difference with enhanced mental clarity, sustained energy, sharper focus, and protection against cognitive decline. And no, it won't turn your tongue blue. So head over to twc.health/redacted and use the code redacted to get 10% off plus free shipping. Again, that's twc.health/redacted. Use the code redacted to get 10% off.
Right, and it scares people. Beyond being fraudulent, it also makes people think that someone's going to bird a cross on their lawn because they're black. You don't know how prevalent racism really is when some of it is manufactured in order to scare you.
Well, I would argue that if you have to manufacture racism, you probably don't have enough of it.
Right.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we're told by the Biden administration, right, that back then that this was the greatest threat to the United States.
Good point.
White supremacy. We heard this from Alejandro Mayorkas, that this was the greatest threat to the United States. And so, yeah, it is when you're manufacturing it and you're funding it and you're trying to create this chaos. But I brought up at the beginning what you had said, which is, they're receiving funding from the left and the right. And they do this on purpose. So this is not a conservative thing, a liberal thing. They're there because it's one big uniparty, and they're doing this to control us. Can you explain that?
So that's what I have found is that, that meme where it says it's like a war setting and it says somehow there's missiles coming in from one side and the other side. And it says somehow I'm funding both sides of that.
Yeah, also my tax dollars. Yeah.
That's literally the strategy of tension. And you can find it in so many examples where for example, the one I like to use the most because there's so much documentation about it is the overthrow of the Chilean government, where the CIA was going in and funding all of the different political parties except for Salvador Allende, who they despised. And Kissinger, is famous for saying, make the economy scream. But they have no allegiance to any one political party. They just want control. And that's basically what they're doing in the United States. They control us by making us afraid. So if, for example, the Patriot Front, that was part of the indictment as well, that they were using that organization and to further that white supremacy type narrative. If they're funding, the funding comes in from the Soros organizations, the funding comes in from things like the Ford Foundation and those types of things that you think are bipartisan when they're really not. And the other point I want to make is, why is this coming out now?
Yes.
That was my question. Yeah.
Yes. It's not like, I told you it was set up in 1971. It's not like the money laundering wasn't going on this entire time. It's not like they weren't funding these organizations, because to your point, there's been a lot of credible reporting on ties of the SPLC to the Aryan Nation. And that's the organization where Timothy McVeigh and the people of Oklahoma bombing was aggregating. And I don't know if you remember, but they had a gentleman there from Germany by the name of Strassmeyer. Mm-hmm. And he was training the people there on all types of quote unquote terror techniques. Well, if you go back and look at Strassmeyer specifically, because this is where I first came across the SPLC. If you look at Strassmeyer specifically, his dad was what I would call the Secretary of the Interior in Germany during a large operation, Gladio, domestic bombing, terrorist attacks, people being assassinated. So he basically oversaw this. And there are credible reporting in Germany that says Strassmeyer went back and was employed after his time in the United States in it used to be called the BND, but they changed the name, and I'm not sure what the name of it is, but it's basically the Germany CIA. And that brings the whole Oklahoma bombing to a completely different light if you look at who was embedded in that organization with, again, funding from the SPLC. And so there's all of these ties, and you either come away with the conclusion that all of this stuff went on without the FBI's knowledge or with it. You can't have it both ways. The fact that Strassmeyer, much like one of the Gladio operators that was present when JFK was assassinated from France's OAS, Strassmeyer was allowed to leave. In the immediate aftermath of the bombing, he was basically allowed to fly out of the country back to Germany. Jesus. So again, they either know and are complicit, or they don't know and we're wasting hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars on intelligence. You can't have it both ways.
Yeah.
Right. In the same way that we knew about Mohammed Atta and all of these other individuals ahead of time, well ahead of time. So you can just, and you mentioned Waco. We talked about Ruby Ridge. I mean, this goes back decades.
So those three things are so important to this narrative. Now, I don't have any confirmation that the SPLC was involved in Ruby Ridge or Waco, but those three events all had FBI involved in them. And they set up a very critical narrative. The white nationalist Ruby Ridge story with guns, and the Waco story was a Christian religion, and the Oklahoma bombing was a domestic terrorist attack done by a veteran. And so when you put those three together in the 1990s, you have the beginning of the white nationalist domestic terrorist narrative. And you can't look at them separately when you're, yes, when you're building this narrative, because that narrative has been used to control us ever since the 90s.
Wow. When you see it like that,
Yeah.
it is jaw-dropping. And then to know that, yeah, we don't have specific evidence pointed out in this indictment related to those, but it's hard. It would be hard. I'd be shocked if they weren't actively involved in some capacity with the funding, manipulation, coordination, propaganda. Can we talk about the blackmail piece of this before we let you go? Because there's been stories about how they have been able to infiltrate these groups, and then of course they fund them, and then they also blackmail them by putting all sorts of nefarious things on their computers, and this information will get out if you don't go along with what we want you to do.
So there's lots of examples, foreign examples. The one that I use the most is the CIA set up a blackmail operation on Sukarno, who at the time was the leader in Indonesia. They had already tried to overthrow him in the 1950s. They were going to attempt it again in the 1960s. They did two things. They hired a prostitute in LA and flew her to Indonesia to try to get her to sleep with Sukarno. That didn't work. Then they set up a pornography film and filmed a guy wearing a CIA-created mask that looked just like Sukarno having sex with a stranger. And they tried to blackmail Sukarno into not having a coalition government and not hosting the non-aligned countries. The CIA and other intelligence organizations are notorious for doing this.
Gosh.
And more putting like child pornography on their computers as blackmail.
Yes.
We've got this information we're going to release to the world, and that's how this all plays. Well, we're just at the beginning stages of this, but this is absolutely fascinating, and it's crazy to think that you've been researching this for so long, and then here we have this indictment that kind of blows it all out there, and everyone could label you a conspiracy theorist or us a conspiracy theorist, and then here we go, Oklahoma City, Charlottesville, and they were all behind it. It's unbelievable.
Can I also just mention real quickly, Jocelyn Benson spent a whole lot of time, that she's the Secretary of State in Michigan right now that was involved in the 2020 election. She also is running for governor. She worked at the SPLC for a very long time, and her job there was to monitor, target nationalist political groups. And then she later was on their board of directors. I would encourage your entire audience to dig into the people that have served on their board and has been their lawyers, because another one, Nancy Abuti, Biden appointed a judge on the 11th Circuit Court, and she had been at the SPLC for a very long time. I also got a tip that his brother, whose name is Charles Leslie Dees, owns a weapons company in Montgomery, Alabama, right down the road from the SPLC's headquarters. And he sells all kinds of protective gear, you know, like if you were going to participate in a rally of some type. So this family needs to be looked into. And I encourage your audience to do as much as the research, because their agenda is in, as a matter of fact, I just wrote a note, 1,400 schools. They created an agenda of how bad white nationalists are, and it is being used in over 1,400 school districts. They are the office of choice when it comes to domestic terrorism for the FBI and the DHS.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, you bring up a great point. I mean, she's Michigan's Secretary of State, or at least on the Benson front, Jocelyn Benson, and only like local newspapers are covering her connections to the SPLC, like the local like Michigan Center Square newspapers. That her past role with the Southern Poverty Law Center, and she is a gubernatorial candidate.
Correct.
So, what was she doing? How was she involved in any of the incitement of chaos and violence that would be used perhaps to push, funding or a political agenda? Yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
she's
great.
an Oxford grad and a Harvard law grad, and that's kind of a pedigree. She went to a private women's school, Wellesley. And
Mostly, yeah.
when you do your research, when they go to these elite private colleges and then they go to the Oxford school, all of this agenda for the strategy of tension goes back to Oxford, the Rhodes Scholars, and to the Fabian Society, Milner's kindergarten. This goes way back to the
Did you know the Schofield Bible was sponsored by Oxford University? In fact, he spent a lot of time there while writing it. Yeah.
Yes. So it's a big agenda. And when you see things like that and they repeat over and over with these people, they're in the club.
Wow.
Yikes. All right.
Well, Colonel Watkins, always great to see you. Thank you so much. This is an unbelievable story we're going to continue to watch and unpack. But thank you for your perspective on this. And thank you for being out there on the front lines of this and telling all of us about it. And now we have the indictment to confirm it. So no conspiracy theorists here. Thank you, Colonel. Great to see you, as always. Thank you for your time.
Thanks for having me.